My name is Claire Dunaway. I am 41 years old. And at 7:22 on a Saturday morning, I heard my brother Keith say, "Claire's kid doesn't get a room. She can sleep on a towel on the porch if they even come." To my sister-in-law Vanessa, in the upstairs hallway of the beach house, while they believed I was still down at the water, walking the shoreline with Lily. I was not at the water. I was standing at the bottom of the back staircase with 2 mugs of coffee, one black and one with oat milk, because Vanessa had mentioned the night before that she'd switched to oat milk. And I'd driven 14 minutes to the only grocery store open before 8 to buy some. The mugs were still hot. I could feel the ceramic burning through my palms as those words settled into my chest. My profession trained me to stand perfectly still when something critical registers. I am a structural load engineer. I assess how much weight a system can bear before it fails. I calculate tolerances, identify stress fractures invisible to the naked eye, determine which component will give first under duress. I have spent 16 years measuring what holds and what doesn't. That morning, standing in that hallway, I felt the familiar sensation of my mind going quiet and beginning to calculate. Not rage, not grief, just the internal click of something beginning to be measured. I did not move. I did not set down the mugs. My fingers registered the exact temperature of the ceramic. Too hot, almost painful, and I held perfectly still while Keith continued talking in that hallway above me, his voice easy, amused. The way he sounds when he believes himself to be fundamentally correct about something no one will challenge. "The house sleeps 12, Vanessa said. There's space. There's space for family," Keith said. "Lily's not family. She's Claire's project. And projects don't get bedrooms." There was one more thing said in that hallway, a number. Keith said, "Besides, once the transfer clears next month, Claire won't even be relevant to this conversation." I filed that. I did not understand it yet. But I filed it the way I file a hairline crack in a load-bearing wall, noted, photographed mentally, requiring further investigation. I stayed perfectly still for what felt like a very long time after those words. Before I tell you what I decided in that stillness, tell me, what time is it where you are? Because I remember exactly what time it was the morning everything changed. Some moments burn the clock into your memory, 7:22. I will never forget 7:22, but I'm not here to talk to Keith, not really. He'll hear this eventually, or he won't. What I'm here to do is talk to you. Before I tell you what I found when I started looking, what time is it where you are? I want to know how many people heard something they recognized in that opening. Let me tell you about my family. Let me tell you about the Dunaways. My father built a commercial marina on the Gulf Coast of Alabama in 1971. By the time I was born, it had grown into a small empire: the marina, a bait-and-tackle supply chain, a boat storage facility, and eventually, the beach house. A 6-bedroom cedar-shake place on pilings, right on the water, purchased in 1986 for $240,000. My father's pride. The place every Dunaway gathering happened for 30 years. When my father died in 2014, his estate went into a family trust administered by my mother. Keith, 2 years older than me, had always been the favored child, not in cruel ways, not overtly, but in the quiet mathematics of attention. He received down payments. He received introductions. He received the assumption that he would eventually run the marina operations. I received the education they didn't think would matter, because they assumed I'd marry into something adjacent to the family business. I did not marry into anything. I became a structural load engineer. I spent my 20s crawling under bridges, inside parking garages, beneath elevated highways, determining which ones would hold and which ones needed immediate intervention. I was good at it. I was exceptional at it. I have a talent for seeing what is about to fail before it does. Lily came to me through foster care when she was 11 months old. The adoption was finalized when she was 3. She is now 9 years old. She has a gap between her front teeth and a way of tilting her head when she's confused that makes her look like she's studying you for a research paper. She is the best thing I have ever done. Keith's objection to Lily was never spoken directly, not to me, not until that morning, when he believed I couldn't hear him. But it lived in the architecture of every gathering. The seating arrangements that placed her at the children's card table, long after she was old enough for the main table. The Christmas gift disparities, his children receiving electronics and bicycles, while Lily received a single book, unwrapped, with a gift receipt tucked inside. The way my mother would introduce her grandchildren at church. These are Keith's threes: Tyler, Madison, and Connor, and this is Claire's little girl, not granddaughter. Little girl. I noticed these things the way I notice stress marks on concrete. I documented them internally. I did not act. For 6 years I did not act. The skill that had identified failing infrastructure across the Gulf Coast for 16 years was about to identify the failing infrastructure of my own family. The beach house was the center of everything. After my father died, my mother maintained it through the trust. Every Memorial Day, every 4th of July, every Thanksgiving weekend. The Dunaways gathered there. I paid into the trust quarterly. Keith paid into the trust quarterly. We both believed we were maintaining a shared family asset. I contributed $4,200 per quarter for 11 years. That's $184,800. I never missed a payment. Snorts. The irony is that I spent my entire career identifying structures that looked sound from the outside, but were failing from within. I could spot a compromised foundation at 50 yards. But I lived inside a family financial structure for 11 years, without once requesting to see the engineering drawings. After that morning, after 7:22, I went back to the shoreline. I walked with Lily. She collected shells, and didn't notice that my hands were shaking. I smiled at her and told her the shells were beautiful, and I held the 2 mugs I'd never delivered, and until the coffee went cold and the ceramic stopped burning. We stayed through that Saturday. I was pleasant. I was present. I said nothing. On Monday morning, back home in Mobile, I sat down at my desk and began to pull the threads Keith had handed me without knowing it. Once the transfer clears next month, Claire won't even be relevant to this conversation. Transfer. What transfer? I started where I always start on a structural assessment, with the foundation documents. I called the trust attorney, Gerald Hess, who had administered my father's estate. I identified myself. I asked for copies of the current trust documentation, which I was entitled to as a named beneficiary. Gerald hesitated. "Claire, when's the last time you reviewed the trust documents?" 2014, I said. "When Dad passed." Another hesitation. "You should come in." I went in that Thursday. Gerald placed a folder in front of me containing the original trust documents from 2014 and a subsequent amendment filed in 2019. The amendment transferred primary beneficiary status of the beach house property from joint family trust to individual ownership, under Keith's name. I stared at that document for a long time. Something in me was running numbers I hadn't asked it to run. The amendment required 2 signatures, my mother's as trustee and mine as co-beneficiary waiving rights. My signature was on that document. Except it wasn't my signature. The slant was close, the pressure was reasonable, but I initial documents with CMD, Claire Marie Dunaway, and the initial on this amendment read CD, no middle initial, and the downstroke on the D was vertical. Mine hooks left. 16 years of signing engineering certifications had made my D-hook left so consistently that I could identify my own signature from across a room. That was layer 1. The obvious insult. Keith had tried to transfer the beach house into his name using a forged signature. But here is what made my stomach drop. The amendment was filed in 2019. 5 years ago. 5 years of quarterly payments I'd been making into a trust for a property Keith already believed was exclusively his. I pulled the trust's financial records next. Gerald provided them without hesitation once I explained what I'd found on the signature. The quarterly contributions, mine and Keith's, went into an operating account managed by my mother, but Keith's contributions had stopped in 2019. The same year as the amendment, for 5 years, I had been the sole contributor to True ABR property my brother believed he already owned. That brought the total I'd paid since his contributions stopped to $84,000. Into a property I was supposedly no longer a beneficiary of. I spent 3 weeks after that building what I'm about to show you. But before I do, where are you watching from? Leave it below. I want to see how many rooms this story reaches. Layer 2 arrived on a Tuesday evening when I compared the metadata on the Trust Amendment PDF that Gerald had on file. The author field in the document properties didn't say Gerald Hess or his paralegal. It said getaway PC, Keith's personal computer. Keith hadn't hired someone to forge the document. He had created it himself, using what appeared to be a template from the original trust paperwork, altering the beneficiary language, forging my signature, and filing it through my mother. My mother had signed as trustee, which meant my mother knew Labor 3. I went back further. I requested all trust modifications since my father's death. There had been 3. The first, in 2016, redirected the marina's maintenance revenue away from a shared family account into an account solely in Keith's name. The second, in 2017, removed my name from the boat storage facility's insurance policy as a named owner. The third was the 2019 Beach House Amendment. Each document bore my supposed signature. Each was missing the middle initial. Each had a vertical D. This was not one betrayal. This was a systematic dismantling of my inheritance, executed over 3 years, using the same forged signature technique each time, endorsed each time by my mother's trustee signature. Keith, I want to make sure you understand what I found, because the next part is the part you thought no one would find. Laugher 4. The transfer Keith had mentioned that morning in the hallway, the one clearing next month, was the final piece. A sale agreement for the beach house property to a development company. Purchase price, $1.4 million. The beach house my father bought for $240,000 in 1986, maintained by my contributions for 11 years, was about to be sold by my brother for $1.4 million. Without my knowledge, without my consent, using documentation that claimed I had waived all rights 5 years earlier. The closing date was August. 6 weeks away. I took everything to an attorney named Sandra Okafor. Not Gerald, because Gerald had accepted forged documents without verification for 5 years, and I no longer trusted his competence or his loyalties. Sandra reviewed the materials in 40 minutes and looked up at me over her reading glasses. "This is fraud," she said. "Multiple counts. How would you like to proceed?" "Completely," I said. "There is one person in this story I have not yet told you about. My Aunt Ruth. My father's sister. She is 73 years old. She served on the County Planning Commission for 22 years. She was present when my father's will was originally drafted. She had her own copy of the original trust documents, the real ones, unmodified, locked in a fire-proof safe in her house in Fairhope. Ruth had always been quiet at family gatherings. She sat in corners. She drank sweet tea. She watched. She had been watching for years. The confrontation happened at the marina, Keith's office, the building my father built. The room Keith had remodeled with mahogany paneling and a brass nameplate that read Keith R. Dunaway, Operations Director. His monument. I walked in on a Thursday afternoon with Sandra, a manila folder, and Aunt Ruth. Keith was behind his desk. My mother was there. She'd been called in advance by Sandra's office, told only that there was a trust matter requiring immediate attention. Keith smiled when I walked in. "Claire, what's this about?" "The beach house," I said. "What about it?" "Casual. Easy. The way he sounds when he believes himself to be holding all the cards." Sandra placed the original trust document on his desk. Then the 2019 amendment. Then the metadata printout showing authorship. Then the 3 other forged documents, chronologically arranged. Then the sale agreement dated for August 15th. Keith's face changed. It moved through surprise into something harder. "I don't know what you think this proves," he said. "First tactic, denial. These documents were filed properly through Gerald. If there's an error, it's administrative. The author field on the PDF shows your personal computer, Keith," Sandra said. "That doesn't mean anything. I helped Gerald with formatting. He asked me to clean up the template." My mother shifted in her chair. "Keith, what is she talking about? What sale agreement?" Keith ignored her. Second tactic, reframing. Claire, I don't know what you're trying to do here, but showing up at my office with a lawyer feels like a threat. This is a family matter. A family matter involving forged signatures and $1.4 million in undisclosed property sales, Sandra said. She's always been like this, Keith said to my mother. Third tactic, credibility attack. Dramatic. Paranoid. She never wanted to be part of this family's business, and now she's trying to destroy it because she's bitter about the way things worked out. My mother said nothing. She was staring at the sale agreement. Keith, my mother said slowly. You told me the amendment was something Claire agreed to. You said she signed it at your kitchen table. She did, Keith said. I didn't, I said. You're lying, Keith said. You signed it and now you regret it. That's what this is. Buyer's remorse. That was when Ruth spoke. She had been standing by the window, quiet, watching. She opened her purse and produced a sealed envelope. I have the original will and trust documents as they were filed in 1987 and amended after David's death in 2014, Ruth said. Her voice was steady, formal, the voice of 22 years on a planning commission. I also have a notarized letter from David, my brother, specifying that Claire was to receive primary beneficiary status of the beach house property specifically because, and I quote, she is the one who will take care of people in it. I witnessed this letter. I notarized it myself. Keith went pale. He had not known Ruth was coming. He had not known Ruth had documents. He had not known my father had written that letter. That letter isn't legally binding, Keith said, but his voice had thinned. The forged signatures are legally actionable, Sandra said. The sale agreement constitutes attempted fraud. The quarterly contributions Claire made under false pretenses constitute theft by deception. Mr. Dunaway, my client is prepared to file criminal complaints today, or we can discuss an alternative resolution. Keith looked at my mother. Mom, tell them I didn't. My mother was crying, silently, not for Keith, not for me, for herself, I think, for what she had signed without questioning. I stood in that room and I delivered the only thing I had come to say. Keith decides who belongs based on what he can take from them. Lily was never the problem. She was just the excuse. I did not say another word during that meeting. The consequences unfolded over the following weeks, with the mechanical inevitability of a structure finally giving way under its own fraudulent load. Sandra filed an emergency injunction, blocking the August 15th sale. The development company's attorneys withdrew their offer within 72 hours once the title dispute was disclosed. Keith's access to the trust operating account was frozen pending investigation. The $84,000 in contributions I had made since 2019 was flagged for restitution. By September, the county prosecutor's office opened a formal investigation into the forged documents. Keith retained criminal defense counsel. His attorney fees consumed the first $40,000 of his personal savings within 2 months. The marina's commercial insurance policy was audited once the fraudulent document modifications came to light. Keith's operations director status was suspended pending resolution. 3 commercial fishing contracts, representing roughly $180,000 in annual revenue, were transferred to interim management. My mother moved to a smaller apartment in October. She could not look at me. She could not look at Keith. She existed in the middle of what she had enabled, unable to claim innocence, unable to assign blame elsewhere. In November, Keith's wife Vanessa filed for legal separation. Not because of the fraud directly, because she discovered that the beach house sale proceeds had been earmarked for a boat Keith had already placed a deposit on, a 42-foot sport fisher, $320,000. The deposit came from the trust account. Vanessa had known nothing about the sale, the boat, or the deposit. Jennifer, my mother's sister, who had been present at 3 family gatherings where Lilizzy was treated as less than, called me in late September. She had been silent through years of small cruelties. She had laughed nervously when Keith made his comments. She had never once said, "That's not right." After seeing the forged documents, after Ruth showed her the evidence at a quiet lunch in Fairhope, Jennifer went home and sat in her car for 20 minutes before going inside. She told me this later. She said she was counting the number of times she had watched something happen and called it Keith being Keith. In October, she sent me a letter, handwritten, 3 pages. She said she was sorry. She said she had known something was wrong for years and had chosen comfort over confrontation. She said she did not expect forgiveness. I read the letter twice. I put it in my desk drawer. I did not write back for 6 weeks. When I finally responded, I said, "Thank you for being honest. I'm not ready for more than that yet." It was real, her apology, and it was insufficient. Both things were true. I made one phone call that mattered more than any legal filing. I called Tyler, Keith's oldest son, 17 years old. I told him that whatever happened between his father and me, he was welcome at the beach house any time. I told him Lily thought of him as her cousin and always had. I told him none of this was his fault, and none of it changed his relationship with me. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Aunt Claire, I'm sorry about what Dad said about Lily." "I know you are," I said. "That's why you're welcome." The beach house was formally transferred into my sole legal name in January, as it should have been from the beginning. The trust was dissolved. The marina operations were restructured under independent management, pending the resolution of Keith's legal situation. In March, Keith accepted a plea agreement. 2 counts of forgery. 1 count of attempted fraud. Restitution of $84,000 to be paid over 5 years. 18 months probation. No jail time but a felony record that ended his ability to hold a fiduciary position in any family business. The brass nameplate was removed from his office door. I do not know what happened to it. The beach house sits on the water the way it always has. Cedar shake, 6 bedrooms, the deck facing west toward the sunset. Lily has her own room now, the corner one, with windows on 2 sides, where you can hear the waves from bed. Last summer, I did something I had postponed for 9 years. I enrolled in a marine biology continuing education program at the university in Mobile. I had wanted to study coastal ecosystems since I was 22 years old, but my career went one direction and my family obligations went another. And eventually I stopped mentioning it, because no one asked. Lily comes with me to Saturday field sessions. She wears rubber boots, 3 sizes too large, and takes notes in a composition book with a purple cover. We are studying what holds things together. The difference between structures that endure and structures that fail. It turns out this applies to more than concrete and steel. Here is what I have learned. Silence functions as load-bearing architecture. It holds up systems that would collapse if anyone spoke. My mother's silence held up Keith's entitlement for 30 years. Jennifer's silence held up the pretense that small cruelties were just personality. My silence, my years of noticing without acting, held up the fiction that documenting harm internally is the same as addressing it. It is not. Documentation without action is just a more organized form of permission. The structure fails anyway. The only question is whether you are still inside when it does. At 7:22 on a Saturday morning last month, I was standing in the kitchen of the beach house making coffee.
2 mugs.
1 black, 1 with oat milk. Lily has decided she likes oat milk now, like it's a personality trait. I heard her upstairs talking to herself, narrating some story she was inventing, her voice easy and unguarded in a house where she knows every room looks thanks to her. I held those mugs and the ceramic was warm against my palms, and I stood there in the quiet, and I did not need to calculate anything. If the people in your life spoke about you, the way Keith spoke about Lily when no one was watching, what would you hear? And more importantly, would you already know? This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, education, and dramatic reflection. We hope it reminded you that your dignity is not negotiable, and that setting a boundary, even a painful one, can be an act of love for yourself and everyone the pattern would have reached next.